A dancer from Kansas, Cherryvale born and bred. Dancing gave you opportunity, your ticket to New York City. You met the juggling man, found the street of forgotten men. Dreams flickered on the silver screen, seeped in nitrate and gin. A jazz baby moving with rhythm, flowing lines with acting so sublime. A social celebrity in silk stockings, a Venus in evening gowns. Lost in a world of make-believe, choices made upon a whim. Going where boredom led, not wanting to play their game. Speeding your way to Berlin, leaving a beggar's life behind. Fame and immortality waited, Lulu was your destiny. Returning to Hollywood full of hope, only to find the marquee lights fading, replaced by bit parts and empty promises. A lost girl imprisoned by Pandora's box. Hello, BookTube, and that's a poem that I wrote called Nitrate and Gin. It's about the actress, dancer, and author Louise Brooks. I've read that on my Sunday poem a few weeks ago, but it's more apt today, August 8th, because on August 8th, 1985, she died in Rochester, New York, of a heart attack in her apartment. Now, I like to watch something of hers on her birthday, as well as the day she died. And I decided this year to reread her book. It's a slim book, but it's a collection of articles called Lulu in Hollywood. And this is an expanded edition published by the University of Minnesota Press in 2000. It was originally published in 1982. And articles various years. And also, I watched Pandora's Box today. Now, before I get into the book, I'd like to do sort of a little sketch, a biography of Louise Brooks. And she was born November 15th, 1906, in Cherryvale, Kansas, as Mary Louise Brooks. Her father, Leonard Brooks, was an attorney, and her mother, Myra, was a pianist, and she loved culture, and she didn't really like the idea of bringing up children, even though she had 4 eventually. Louise was the first, and she told her husband that because she had a large family where she grew up when her mother died young, she had to take care of her siblings. So she wasn't going to do that, so she basically said they'd have to fend for themselves. And by 1918, Louise was joined by 2 brothers, Martin, Theodore, and a younger sister, June, and I think it was about 1916, June was born. And they moved in 1918 and settled briefly in Independence, Kansas, and then in 1919 moved to a large house in Wichita. And Louise talks about the house being full of books, and the library room was full of 19th century literature that she loved. And she said that because of her father's law books, the foundation on one side of the house sank 11 inches. She was a bit precocious, but she began taking dancing lessons, and she excelled in it, and began dancing at fairs and at groups, women's groups, men's clubs, and so forth around Wichita. And sometime in 1920, the Dennis Shawn dance troupe showed up in Wichita, and that is Ruth St. Dennis and Ted Shawn. I just want to note that Ted Shawn, his surname is spelled S-H-A-W-N. No, no connection, but I just thought I'd point that out. And she knew that in New York City there would be a school for dancing, the Dennis Shawn school, and so in the summer of 1922, she went to New York City with a chaperone. It was another woman that wanted to also take the class, and and she excelled in the class, and she toured throughout the U.S. and into Canada for almost 2 years until like May 1924, and then she was fired from the group. But during that time too, she was a bit, as I say, rambunctious, and she was not quite 18. She was still only 17 years old in 1924, but she got a job with the George White's Scandals, which was a sort of variety review with dancing girls and so forth, and it was by the help of a friend of hers, Barbara Bennett, one of the Bennett sisters, Constant, and Joan Bennett. And so she worked there for a little while, and then she, on a whim almost, decided to sail for Paris in September 1924. And then later she shows up in London and works at the Café de Paris in London, doing the Charleston. But she returns to the U.S. in January 1925, and she gets a bit part in a film for the Famous Players Lasky production company, which later turned into Paramount. But it was a small part in a film called The Street of Forgotten Men. And she also started working with the Ziegfeld Follies, and she met the juggling man, W.C. Fields. And in the summer of 1925, Charles Chaplin was in New York City, and she shacked up with him basically for 2 months during the summer, and she has fond memories of that. And in 1926, she went to Florida and filmed with W.C. Fields. It's an Old Army Game is the name of the film, and it was directed by Eddie Sutherland, and she married him, Eddie Sutherland, in July, and then she went on to do a number of other films even before this, sort of bit parts. But one of the bigger parts was Howard Hawks' Girl in Every Port, which was released in 1928, and also she met a good friend, it turned out to be a good friend, Pepe Lederer, which we'll hear more about because it comes up in her book, at San Simeon, Randolph Hearst's mansion. And Pepe was Hearst's mistress's niece, Marion Davies. Sorry, I had to think of her name there for a minute. And then and in 1928, she did for William Wellman, Beggars of Life, with Wallace Beery, and in the same sort of, and then immediately after, the Canary Murder Case, which was a Philo Vance mystery with William Powell. And at that time, while she was just nearing the filming up of finishing the film of the Canary Murder Case, her contract was up with Paramount, and she was expecting a raise, but they said no, she's not going to get a raise. You either take the same salary or quit. So she said, "Well, I quit." and that really surprised them. But at the same time, in Germany, G.W. Pabst, who she never heard of, had saw at some point A Girl in Every Port and wanted to make a film about, from two plays by Frank Wedekind, and one of them is Pandora's Box. It's a very beloved German play that was written in the late 1900s, early uh, 19 or late 19th century and early 1900s. And he wanted her to star in this, and he was searching everywhere for people, and he never heard anything back from her, because he had telegraphed basically Paramount, and they didn't reply. But she knew about it through another contact and a lover she had at Paramount. And so she said she was going to go. And as soon as, like, literally, I think on August 12th, I think it was, that they wrapped up shooting of Canary Murder Case, and on the 14th she was on a ship to Berlin, and so she filmed Pandora's Box. There'll be more about that in a little while also. And then she returned back to the U.S., but then came back. She was going to do a film in France called Prix de Beauté, basically Miss Europe, I think it is the English title. But that sort of was pushed back, and Pabst did another film with her called Diary of a Lost Girl, and then she did Prix de Beauté back in France after going back to the U.S. and coming back. And when she before she went back to Berlin the first time, Paramount had decided to do to make at least some of the reels or all of the film of Canary Murder Case sound. So they needed her back to do retakes and to do dubbing. And they ordered her back, and she just said basically, take a hike. She's not doing it. And so then she went back to Berlin that time. And because of that, she sort of burned bridges there, because they basically blacklisted her by saying that her voice was no good for sound and everything like that. So it sort of ruined her career. But when she came back to Hollywood in 1930, all she did, like, throughout the 30s, did little bit parts. She started a dancing school, but she went back to Wichita to her family about 1933. But yeah, Wichita didn't really accept her, and she didn't feel right there. She went back to Hollywood, did a few more parts in some films, and her last film was Overland Stage Raiders in 1938 with John Wayne. And then in 1940, she basically left Hollywood for good, and she went to New York. She worked occasionally as a sales girl for a couple of years, actually, at Saks Fifth Avenue, and she did some radio soaps, and possibly worked as an escort. She met a few rich men that sort of helped her out, let's put it that way. And she, as she says, she's flirted with the idea of suicide by taking yellow sleeping pills. But in 1956, James Card from Eastman House in Rochester, New York, sort of tracked her down and says, "Why don't you come and live in Rochester, New York? You can have access to the film library and film archive." So she went, and she began researching and writing about film, because she was a keen observer, even though she didn't really care about what was going on too much. But she met a lot of people, and she was a keen observer. And what resulted was, over many years, decades, she wrote several articles that were published in various magazines, including Sight and Sound. She sort of was a terror of the public library in Rochester. she would get books, and she would, pester them for checking some information, because after a while, from about 1960 onward, she didn't really leave her apartment until her death for like 25 years almost, because she had very deteriorating osteoporosis in her hip, and it got so bad that she could barely sit up at times. But she read every book that she could find on Hollywood and stars, memoirs, and so forth. And she would actually write in the books. And after a while, people found out about this, and they started stealing the books from the library, because they knew she had her writing or annotations in it. But she drank heavily as well for quite a while, and like she was saying that she'd drink heavily, and then it would take sort of 4 days of drinking and recovering, and then 3 days of reading and writing per week. But after a really, really bad fall, she stopped drinking because she really hurt herself. So she, well, didn't stop fully, but she partially stopped. And then around 1953, Henri Langlois at the Cinematic France archive in France sort of rediscovered her and made a statement: "There is no Garble, there is no Dietrich, there is only Louise Brooks." And in 1958, she was requested to go to Paris, where they did a homage to Louise Brooks, and she spent her 52nd birthday there, because she went late in 1958 there. And during all this, like she was living on an allowance that was sort of a pot of money from various people. $250 a month, and she began corresponding with a number of people. There was several that came to see her, students and so forth, and she included an aspiring author, young man called Jan Wall, and she made friends with him, and they were both sort of struggling and trying to get writing, and he wound up writing children's books, and they had a long relationship of decades of writing and actually meeting in person. And she was actually photographed by Roddy McDowell and put in a book, like the photographs that he was doing. And she began correspondence with Kevin Bronlau after an article that showed up in Sight and Sound in 1965, I think it was. And he came to see her, and they made a friendship and continued to correspond till basically until her death. And then she was in 1978. She was visited by the theater critic Kenneth Tynan, who wrote an article called "The Girl in the Black Helmet" for the New Yorker. And in 1982, this book, Lulu in Hollywood, was published. This is an expanded edition, but we'll get to that. And on August 8th, 1985, she died in her apartment of a heart attack. And so getting to this, I really enjoyed this. This has the Kenneth Tynan article in here. It's a lengthy article, and it's a really good article where he sort of rediscovers her in Hollywood one summer and watches a film, and then he finds out that the Eastman House has a number of films, so he goes there and then makes an appointment to see her. And there's some really good quotes in here that he has from Lottie Eisner, a French film critic, about Louise Brooks, an actress who needed no directing but could move across the screen, causing the work of art to be born by her mere presence. Kevin Bronlau says her youthful admirers see in her an actress of brilliance, a luminescent personality, and a beauty unparalleled in human history. David Thompson, another film critic and film historian, one of the most mysterious and potent figures in the history of cinema. She was one of the first performers to penetrate to the heart of screen acting. And Henri Langlois, the director of the Cinémathèque Francois, I'm mispronouncing this, I'm sure. Those who have seen her can never forget her. She is the modern actress par excellence. As soon as she takes the screen, fiction disappears along with art, and one has the impression of being present in a documentary. The camera seems to have caught her by surprise without her knowledge. She is the intelligence of the cinematic process, the perfect incarnation of that which is photogenic. She embodies all that the cinema rediscovered in its last years of silence. Complete naturalness and complete simplicity. Her art is so pure that it becomes invisible. And this here as essays, and it's got like, her Kansas to New York about, growing up and so forth, and with regards to her house, her family, and things like that. And then there's an essay on location with Billy Wellman, which was the filming of Beggars of Life, talking about Wallace Beery, who she liked, and just a number of things of that William Wellman, Wild Bill Wellman, didn't really like her that much because she didn't take acting seriously, and she was not treated that well by sort of the cast and the crew, except Wallace Beery, and then Marion Davis's niece, Pepe Lederer, that she met at Sam Simeon, who she made very good friends with, and who later moved to, she went to Europe, and she didn't see her for a long time, and when she came back in 1935, she was a mess, basically, addicted to cocaine, drugs, and alcohol, and she was put into a mental hospital, and she jumped out the window and killed herself. But there's the story in there as well, that in early 1930, that Pepe Lederer had an abortion because she found out she was pregnant, and she didn't know when this happened, and they sort of discovered it probably happened on New Year's Eve, 1929 to 1930, where they both were, her and Louise Brooks were at a party, and they got drunk, and she was taken advantage of, raped, in other words, but they didn't know who this was. And then after her death in 1935, a friend of Pepe Lederer comes up and talks about, oh, that was me, and sort of jokingly saying that, oh, that's what I do with all my girls. I get them drunk and take them home and basically rape them. There's Humphrey and Bogey, which is an interesting essay as well, or article, because she knew him while he was in the theater, and she thought of it as Humphrey. She thought he had beautiful lips, and then after a while, he sort of cultivated this thing of becoming Bogey, and with scars and things like that, and making his life looking rough. But he was a different kind of person. He wasn't quite exactly like that. And then the one called The Other Face of W.C. Fields, because she talks about going up to his room, drinking, and watching him juggle, and how precise he was in his routines, and he had perfect timing, and he didn't care about cameras, angles, or anything like that. He rehearsed his scenes, but in the cutting room, it ruined his timing at times because they cut things differently. And she talks about his loneliness and things like that, and his drinking, but he was an amazing juggler and extremely funny. And they did the it's an old army game together, which is a fun film. It's a little different. Like W.C. Fields had this sort of floating mustache that sort of moved around it, but it was out from his lips, so it looks a bit strange for today. But and he did a number of films, I think 4 or 5, with Eddie Sutherland, who Louise married and then divorced a couple of years later. Um, but they had a good relationship for films. And then there's Gish and Garbo. She's talking about Lily and Gish and Garbo, where because she does, like Louise talks about Hollywood is a machine that just grinds you out and makes you a slave. And they didn't like basically Lily and Gish because she had power. She had huge, like one of the highest paychecks for it, and she could dictate what she was doing. And they sort of switched and pushed her out in some ways because they liked Garbo because they were paying her less, and she became a huge star. And then Pabst and Lulu talking about going to London to Berlin to film Pandora's Box. As you can see, Pandora's Box. And they're very interesting things where, they say in here, or I've read a few times, that one character in there, a countess, could be the first openly lesbian on film. But the actress did not like doing that. She did not like playing this or looking. It called for her to look lustfully at Louise Brooks' character Lulu, and she stormed off the set. And G.W. Pabst had to sort of calm her down, get her back on the set, and basically had her look past Louise and look at him while he was sort of making sort of love across the room to her, so she would look lustfully at him. And got the performances out. And Kortner, who played the doctor in there, I'm not going to try to pronounce the names because I can't do it, hated Louise. And there's one scene where he grabs her by her arms, and he grabbed her so strong that she had heavy bruises on this. And every time he'd finish a scene with her, he'd just storm off the set. He could not stand her at all. And they did not like her in Germany for taking this role, that it should be German, a German girl. And it was when Louise Brooks took the role and Pabst got the telegram saying that she was coming. He had apparently Marlene Dietrich in the office, was going to sign Marlene Dietrich, but he didn't want to because he thought she was too old for the part. But a lot of people, it was panned even when it went out. But when you watch that film, she is just perfect in this. They're saying that she can't act, and it's like, that's why I like in my poem, Acting So Sublime, because she is perfect acting in that. Even if she wasn't acting, she said she didn't, like, the way it worked was like Pabst would give her a feeling and emotion to work on. And that's what she portrayed, was that emotion. And while she was on the set, she would read, like wherever she was, she'd read like Schopenhauer and things like that. And Lottie Eisner came when she was, I think, doing Diary of a Lost Girl, I think it was. And but she thought it was all set up, that she was reading, Schopenhauer and stuff like that. But that's what she did. And there's a great photograph that Louise set up with a director of her on the set. Sorry, I should have. I didn't think of it until now. There it is here. It's favorite publicity still, because I posed it myself when I went to Hollywood in 1927. I found myself looked upon as a literary wonder because I read books. I'm posing with Ken Thompson, who wrote the screenplay for Now We're in the Air. And it's like she's sitting there with books at her feet in the chair. So yeah, and it just sort of the last essay is Why I Will Never Write My Memoirs, and she sort of said this several times, and the main reason she's saying is that she will never be able to tell her her sex life, her sexuality properly. But she was openly that she dallied with women occasionally, but she didn't. She liked men more than women. It never did anything for her, I guess, is the easiest way to put it crudely. Uh, but and she's not, and she talks about in here, she's not talking about the orgies or how many people she slept with. I'm still I'm still unsure what she means by this, but she talks about in a thing that there's some great lines in this. And she was sort of like, brought up in the Bible Belt of Anglo-Saxon farmers who prayed in the parlor and practiced incest in the barn. And then she said that I am too unwilling to write the sexual truth that would make my life worth reading. I cannot unbuckle the Bible Belt. That is why I will never write my memoirs. Oh, jeez. But yeah, and not all of her films. She made 24 films in total, and not all of them are available. First one, as I say, was Street of Forgotten Men. A whole bunch of others. The American Venus, Social Celebrity. It's the Old Army Game, which is available. The Show Off is available. Well, the Street of Forgotten Men is available. The second reel, about 10 to 15 minutes, is missing, but her parts are still there. And they actually restored it, and it was played at a festival in Hollywood, in LA, earlier this year. So I'm hoping that there will be a Blu-ray of it eventually. And Now We're in the Air. Recently, a small bit with Louise and Wallace Beery has shown up, so that's actually on the internet. A Girl in Every Port is the one, the Howard Hawks one, that Pap saw and thought, that's Lulu. And then Beggar's Life is available. That's been released. Canary Murder Case is still around. Her voice was eventually dubbed by Margaret Livingston. Not to good effect. And then Pandora's Box, Diary of a Lost Girl, and Prey de Beauté. And then when she went back, she did a small short called Windy Riley in Hollywood. I thought it was actually Goes Hollywood, but it says in Hollywood here. But yeah, she and she talks. That's the first time she talks, and it was directed by somebody called Goodrich, what actually was Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, who she says sort of was like just a lump in the chair. And she he didn't direct. He was a broken man by 1931 because of the scandal and the Hearst sort of destroying him in the newspaper without any evidence at all. But she said he was a fabulous dancer. She said it was like floating in the arms of a donut. And then she did other bit parts in films. God's Gift to Women, It Pays to Advertise, Empty Saddles, King of Gamblers. I think in that one her scene was cut. When You're in Love, or maybe that one was too. And then last with John Wayne, Overland Stage Riders. She thought he was like a Greek god. And there was also another thing that at some point I ate an old neighbor from Cherryvale gave her a picture, gave Louise a picture of her as a young girl under 10 years old, with the guy that was named. She tells Kenneth Tynan that it is Mr. Feathers, but I think actually his name was Mr. Flowers, and he liked children, and it all of a sudden brought back a repressed memory that she was sexually molested by him at 9 years old. And she remembers telling her mother, and her mother tells her, well, it was your fault. You must have led him on. She's 9 years old. And she married twice. She had, she got divorced from Eddie Sullivan and she married Deering Davis, I think it is, and they did dancing a little bit and stuff, and then she divorced again. She never had any children, but she had nieces and nephews, and this, I suppose, is her masterpiece. Um, I like Diary of Lost Girl too, but it does have a faulty ending, which could have made it a better film. This is a DVD. It is a Criterion collection. It's out of print now, and sometimes, or when I see it, it's very expensive. They have not put this out in a Blu-ray. It needs a new restoration because there's there's lots they could do to fix it up. But this is a nice. It's one of the occasions that I think Criterion is hit or miss with me. But it has a nice booklet. It has the Kenneth Tynan article. It's got another essay, and it's got her essay with Pabst in it as well. And it's got a disc of extras as well. But yeah, it needs a Blu-ray release, and I'm hoping that like the Street of Forgotten Men gets released on Blu-ray, and then they'll actually add the little bit at the very least with We're in the Air Now. It would probably be too much to reconstruct it, but they have reconstructed the Street of Forgotten Men, because the reel that's missed, they've got enough stills that they intersperse that period with still. I'm assuming this is what they've done, because I've seen it before in other films. But anyway, that is my sort of Louise Brooks homage to Louise Brooks, I guess. Homage to Lulu. There's a few passions I have, and this is another one that's been noticed. Is Louise Brooks, as well as Clifford D. Simak. And there are, well, no, I can't let the cat out of the bag for the others. They may eventually come out. Other passions that I have of people or things. Definitely Louise Brooks is one of them. And the sort of best biography is Barry Paris, that was published in 1989. It has a gorgeous picture of her on the back. It's still in print, in paperback. I think it's a newer edition. And there's a collection of articles with Jan Wall. Not articles, letters, back and forth. It's Dear Stinky. That's what she, I think, called him. But they're very good. They're very enlightening, very interesting, sad many times, and funny at other times. And I need to mention this is Kevin Bronlow's The Parade's Gone By, that there is a little a portrait of her that from interviews. It's a short portrait, but it's very well done as well in his Parade's Gone By. And Jan Wall also wrote a few articles of her, and in a collection here called Through a Lens Darkly, he's got an article, cool cover, an article that he wrote called, I'm just trying to find it, Comet in the Sky, Louise Brooks. And these are published by Bear Manor Media. The letters was published in 2010, and the essays of Jan Wall about film was published in 2009. So yeah, so there's my homage to Louise Brooks at 40 minutes. Sorry, I couldn't make it any shorter. I can make it much, much longer. I will eventually do more detail on Pandora's Box at some point, because I do have the plays that it was by Frank Wedekind that they're based on, so I'm going to talk about that and talk about the production and a little more details about the film and sort of its reception and so forth. But that will be a future video. Take care, BookTube.